Good morning, all. You're very welcome this morning to our Sustainable Cork programme webinar on Unveiling the Ripple Effect, Gender Balance and Workplace Dynamics. Really looking forward to today's session, so thank you all for joining. My own name is Annie Fitzgibbon. I'm Director of Member Services here at Cork Chamber. Just before we kick off, just to make people aware, you might keep your mics off, please, during this session. We are recording it just for our own purposes, and please feel free to use the chat box throughout. There should be plenty of time for Q&A towards the end. So look, I know a lot of you are familiar with this series and with the Sustainable Cork programme, which was first initiated back mid-2020 by Cork Chamber during the pandemic. And it's designed to set a vision for a more sustainable and resilient Cork, empowered by a thriving business community. I suppose to date, since the first webinar in 2020, we've had about 2,000 registrations. So I know a lot of you here today are well used to this series. We have lots of newcomers as well, which is great. The programme has covered topics such as supporting your workforce, Cork City revitalisation, electric mobility, energy cost savings for businesses, and D&I in a hybrid workplace. So lots and lots of themes over the last number of years. Now, as we enter our 5th year, and as Cork strives towards becoming one of Europe's first climate neutral cities, the Sustainable Cork programme in 2024 will again focus on the 3 pillars of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental. I think after last week, it's clear that there is a will for a more inclusive and equitable society. Last week's referendum highlighted the ongoing importance of this debate in relation to gender balance. And it's evident that conversation and debate around achieving gender equity are still very much alive and relevant. So really looking forward to today's discussion around all that. I suppose I'm also conscious of what's happening in other parts of the world at the moment. And I suppose how privileged maybe we are to be able to discuss today's topic in an effort to progress this conversation. So look, on that, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Cork Chamber Skillnet and ESB Generation and Trading. We're very, very thankful for the sponsorship. And we look forward to this series for the rest of the year as we pick up other topics. And I'd now like to hand over, I'd like to thank, I suppose, first of all, as well, our 3 speakers this morning, who Ashley will introduce now, my colleague. So I'm going to hand over to Ashley Amato, our Public Affairs and Sustainability Executive, who leads out on this project and who's going to moderate this session and introduce the speakers. So thanks all again, and we'll see you all again soon. Take care. Bye-bye now.
Great. Thanks very much, Annie. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ashley Amato, and I work in Public Affairs and Sustainability at Cork Chamber. And as Annie said, I manage the Sustainable Cork programme. So you're all very welcome this morning to this webinar and really important discussion on gender balance and workplace dynamics. Gender equality is an issue that affects everyone. It's about ensuring inclusivity for all across society, the economy, and the business landscape. And in Ireland, we've reached a position of much greater gender parity in the workplace. However, it's clear that more progress is needed to finally close the gap and reach a truly inclusive economy. The unequal division of unpaid care work between men and women is still highly prevalent today, adding to this burden of closing that gap and also reducing women's access to and permanency in the labour market. And there are consequences for this, both affecting the career progression of women, but also limiting businesses' potential for innovation, cultivating diverse perspectives, and fostering more inclusive and productive professional environments. And business leaders have a key role to play in creating more inclusive workplaces for all genders and for those with caring responsibilities. And ultimately, this will strengthen business operations and give them a strategic advantage. Now, we're all very much looking forward to hearing from the experts in the field who are championing gender equality and inclusion across their organizations, their sectors, and society. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker today. Angus Hegarty joins us as co-chair for Balance for Better Business. Angus is a seasoned board member, strategic advisor, and thought leader with 4 decades of global experience. He recognizes the connected role between people, business, and technology in driving growth and innovation. Respected for his insights on business, leadership, digital transformation, sustainability, entrepreneurship, and diverse and inclusive workforces, the Irish government appointed Angus as co-chair of the Balance for Better Business initiative, promoting increased female representation on company boards. So Angus, over to you.
Ashley, thank you. Ashley, thanks very much indeed. I appreciate it. And thank you for the opportunity to connect here with all of your Cork Chamber members. I guess, first of all, I know that we're looking at this from a broad set of perspectives. The perspective I'm going to come at it from is a business perspective. I'd like to highlight up front one key element that needs to be added to the dimension. So we're talking about gender diversity. We're talking about balance from a gender perspective. If you do not have an inclusive culture within your organization, you're not going to unlock the benefits. The two pieces have to come together. So that'll be the very first really critical point I would highlight, is it's diversity and inclusion. And I'll come back to that theme. Why are we focused on it? From a business perspective, we're focused on it because companies that have diverse organizations, diverse leadership teams perform better. There's lots of data out there, lots of analysis, McKinsey, etc., that highlights it very, very clearly. By having that diverse leadership team, that diverse organization, the idea is that among that diversity, you have a greater set of ideas, competencies, thoughts, higher levels of innovation. The inclusivity is about unlocking that, making sure that the culture at the boardroom, at the leadership team, and throughout the organization allows people to bring the whole of themselves to the conversation, discussion, to give their input, their ideas, their thoughts, so that ultimately you make better decisions. Make better decisions, you have better outcomes. That's the essence of how I want to frame the discussion that we're having today. I'm going to come at it from two perspectives. I'm conscious of time. One is my role as chair of Balance for Better Business, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And the other is my experience in industry over a number of decades, particularly the last 24 years with Dell Technologies. Balance for Better Business is an initiative that is led, driven by the government, or led by the government, as in, not led by, I'm sorry, a government initiative they have started up. It's led by business. So business communities like we have in Cork, across the country, are fully engaged in leading this initiative. What is the initiative? The initiative is to increase representation on boards and leadership teams and in key decision-making roles from a gender perspective. That isn't where a company should stop, by the way. It's about diversity across many lenses and areas. This particular initiative is focused on gender representation. We set targets. We started 5 years ago. We measure those targets against those targets on an annual basis, and we report against those. We do that for private companies, for public listed companies on the ISAC, and for multinationals. We look at both boards and leadership teams, and we look at key decision-making roles. The overall progress in the last 5 years has been very strong in some areas, some good progress in other areas, and more limited in some key areas. First key highlight is that board representation in ISAC 20 publicly listed companies in the 5 years has gone from 18% female representation to, we announced last week as part of International Women's Day, that has gone to 40%. So 4 out of every 10 board members in the ISAC 20 listed companies is female. So significant progress. We've also seen good progress on boards and leadership teams, but not as far as we've seen in public. It's gone from 17% to 22%. Leadership teams actually is strong at 27% in the ISAC 20, 30% on private companies, and 30% in multinationals. It has moved a certain amount in both private and public, but it's been limited. We really want to drive that forward to at least 40% and ultimately to balance at the end of the day. The other key aspect is key decision-making roles. Here, there's some areas where there's strong representation. For example, senior independent directors on publicly listed companies is 55% female. So actually a majority representation is female in those key independent director roles. But the chair on boards in public companies is only 10%. So we want to see more movement from senior independent director into chair roles. CFOs are 23% on public companies. It's 28% on private companies in Ireland. And that's a key role to CEO, because CEO is very low on public companies, only 6% in the ISAC 20 and 21% in private companies. So CFO role up into CEO role, we want to see more progress. And then secondly, we want to see more movement from independent director up to chair. These are the key decision-making roles. So we want to look at both representation overall and in those key positions as well too. Ireland 5 years ago was a massive lagger in representation on public boards. we were near the bottom of the EU 27. Now we're in the top 10 for boards and the top 5 for leadership teams. So some good progress, but we need to continue to move forward, increasing that representation, better decisions, better outcomes, better business results. What do we recommend to companies? We recommend that you measure against these key areas, representation. You set targets for each of these areas. You build an action plan. You track and measure against that action plan, and you report. We would recommend report publicly, but at the very least, report internally to your organization, the goals you've set, the targets, why you want to do that, why you want to achieve increased representation and more balanced representation, and why it's good for every person in the company if you can achieve that. And then report, and do that at least on an annual basis, if not more often. One of the final points on this aspect is we're beginning to zone in on sectors. When I look at those performances, we see some very strong performances in a number of areas like financial services and other technology, other key represented sectors. But sectors like construction and retail actually lag the average significantly. And so there's some sectors that we're doubling down on applying our focus. The last few minutes before I hand over, I think Manny is up next. Just a few things I would share from my experience and perspectives. If you're going to drive this initiative, you have to lead it from the top of your company. CEO, if it's leadership and organization and business. Chair, if it's board and board focus around representation that you're looking at. That individual and the leadership team and the board must walk the talk. There's no point in having a great banner that says, we are a highly diverse and inclusive organization if the CEO, the chair, the leadership team don't lead from the top and walk the talk. In other words, they act with clear intent that that's what they want to create within their organization. Sometimes I see it where it's, let me hand you over now to the HR leader. Let me hand you over to the D&I leader. We want the CEO, the chair, the leader of the organization or team to lead from the front in relation to it. Some people would say, as you go down on this journey, first of all, are we going to just appoint more women to roles so that we achieve the targets? Absolutely not. You always hire the best person, appoint the best person to the role. What you have to work on is a more diverse slate of candidates. If you're hiring from outside, go work with your recruitment team or with the recruitment agency you're using, and ensure you have a diverse slate, a minimum, ideally, of 2 candidates that are female within that slate. Because if you interview 5 people and they're all men, I guarantee you're going to appoint a man. So have diversity on the slate. On your promotion slates inside the organization, the same must apply. But always pick the best person for the job. That's absolutely critical. I talked at the beginning around build diversity, build diverse teams, build diverse organizations, but you have to change the culture. You have to evolve the culture to be inclusive, collaborative, listening. Of course, you drive to decision-making and decisions at the end of the day, but you need that inclusivity so that the ideas can come out, that the thoughts, the input can be added into that final decision so you make a better decision. And that's absolutely critical. And embracing leadership and a culture in your organization that is collaborative, that's listening, that values humility and selflessness from a leadership style and values perspective. And then finally, on this journey, you have to engage men and women, both. If you've got a network group or an employee resource group, best way to do it, have a man and a woman lead that group. In Balance for Better Business, myself and Carl Andrews chair the Balance for Better Business. It's always been led by 1 woman and 1 man. And bring into that network group and organization plenty of the male leaders and male representation, allies, because everybody wants to focus on creating a more diverse and a more inclusive organization for better business outcomes and better results. It's not the responsibility of just women to address the issue. It's from the leadership from the top and throughout the organization. So engage men into that as well too. I'm watching my time here. Ashley, I think I'm going to pause and hand back so you can hand over, I think, to Manny.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Angus. That last point that you made there on engaging men, it's so important. And I think we're going to get into that a little bit more during the Q&A session. Before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to remind everyone to please utilize the chat box as our speakers are going through their presentations. Any questions that come to mind, please engage in the conversation. So our next speaker actually is Zoe. Manny will be coming up after her. Zoe Deverell is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Lead at ESB. Zoe has led DEI programs across the financial services, technology, and energy industries in Europe and internationally. Driven by curiosity and a passion for DEI, Zoe thrives on collaboration, innovation, outside the box thinking, and challenging ourselves to do more. So Zoe, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ashley. And I'm just going to share my screen here. So if you can just let me know that that's all working okay. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. We had a few technical difficulties at the start, so I'm glad to hear that's all working. So look, thanks very much for that introduction, Ashley. I'm delighted to be here with you all this morning. Thanks very much for the invitation. I'm going to share with you just a little bit about what we're doing at ESB to really advance gender equality in what's particularly a challenging industry to do that in. So I'm going to start just right at the beginning, just to share with you a little bit of insight into how we shape our culture at ESB. So at ESB, we are committed to building and importantly, sustaining a diverse workforce with a culture of inclusion, equity, and belonging, and maintaining an environment where people can be themselves, thrive, and feel connected to our purpose is essential to delivering net zero by 2040. And that's our ultimate long-term strategy at the moment as a company. That is a direct quote from our gender pay gap from our CEO. So going back to what Angus was saying there, you need that buy-in right from the top. And it's something we absolutely have at ESB in buckets, which is great. I'll touch very briefly just on our values. I mentioned there we're a values based and inclusive culture is what we're trying to kind of foster at ESB. So we have 4 values. We're courageous, we're caring, we're driven, and we're trusted. And I think it's really important to bring this back towards our total DEI strategy. Anything we're trying to do, I try my best to ground it within these values. They're understood across the organization. They're that thread through what's a very kind of diverse organization. We've a good spread across multiple locations. So it's important that we have these kind of guiding principles in place. So we're courageous, which means that we challenge ourselves to do better and to challenge the way we've always done things, to keep innovating, to keep progressing. And that's a really, really core value, particularly as we push towards a more equitable and inclusive and diverse workforce. And we're caring, which means that we put our customers at the heart of everything that we do, and we keep ourselves and each other healthy. Driven then, which means we bring passion and persistence to what we do every day with a strong focus on innovation and collaboration. And lastly, we're trusted, which means we each play our part in taking ownership of our work and protecting the health and safety of ourselves and each other. And you'll see there just towards the bottom, I kind of have diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then our net zero emblems beside each other. And that's really important. And Angus touched on that himself, just around the business case. This is a business imperative. And I've said this till I'm blue in the face internally. This is not a nice to have. This is not a favor. This is not CSR work. This is a strategic imperative for any business. And if we're not paying close attention to diversity in all of its forms, we're actually failing as a business. So it's critically important to the success of any business. And there's tons of research out there, particularly from McKinsey, that really, really shows that point. We understand that achieving net zero in particular, that's a huge goal for our industry globally. It's a lofty goal by 2040. And we know that by utilizing diversity, by getting more diverse thoughts, perspectives into the company and retaining them and listening to them, the chances of us getting there are greatly increased. Diversity is linked to innovation. We need to be able to innovate in order to achieve net zero, to think outside the box, to do things differently, to challenge ourselves and each other. And really, we need to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of that. So they're fairly linked to the strategic goals of the company. And it's really important that people understand that. So I just wanted to kind of make that point really important as we start to lay the foundations for getting this stuff right. It's critically important. And part of that then, you know, in terms of getting it right, is looking at how we support, develop, and retain women in our business. So at ESB, women currently make up 27% of our workforce. And that sounds like a small number. I know I've worked across tech, financial services, but given our industry, that's where we are at the moment. That's not to say that we're in any way, washing our hands of it. We have a target in place. So by the end of next year, we have a target that 30% of our workforce will be represented by women. Again, it may not sound like a big, bold number, but in fact, it actually is a very big, bold number for an industry that we're in, and given the pipeline that we're looking at. But nonetheless, that is what we're going for, and we're putting the mechanisms in place now to ensure that we reach that by the end of next year. We've got that leadership buy-in right from the top. The executives are well aware that it is them that are going to be driving progress towards this. I'm here to support, absolutely, but ultimately this is a business imperative, so it's something we just have to do, and we need to do. So look, it's also important to mention women actually make up the majority of roles in our non-STEM business units. So we've really healthy representation across non-STEM business units within ESB, which is a really positive story. And it really means that this target in particular means we'll be focusing particular attention towards those STEM business units, and to attract and critically retain women within those STEM business units. And when attention's been paid to this in the past in ESB, we've actually seen great progress being made. So if I take our networks business as an example, women made up 24% of our network technician apprenticeships in 2022. And last year, 27% of those apprenticeships were held by women, which is a huge step in the right direction for us. It's not that long ago that number was very close to 0%. So we know that when attention is paid to this, great strides can be made. It's important that we listen to the women across our organisation. We partner with external organisations, look at how we're developing that pipeline, and ensuring that we're promoting ESB as a great place to work for women. And we need to create environments where women are going to want to stay, ultimately, where they feel supported. And so you'll see on the slide, there's a Microsoft Teams background. It looks like a slide itself. But that was actually created by our Gender ERG, which is a newly formed employee resource group at ESB that we launched last year. Purposely called it Gender rather than a women's group, because back to Angus's point, absolutely, in that line of thinking, we need everybody to be a part of this. It can't be women fixing this alone. It's for everybody, and also to be gender inclusive of all genders. But they actually hosted their first event last week for International Women's Day, which was amazing. And we had Dr. Cara McGann from IBEC in, who shared her insights with us. So really great to see, the ERGs creating those safe spaces for women, to understand the realities for women in our business, and understanding that employee voice is really, really key to all of this. So great to see that they're hitting the ground running. Our ROI gender pay gap, it's really encouraging to see that that's closing year on year. When overtime and role-specific allowances are excluded, our pay gap is 2.6%. So for a company where we have 27% women at the moment, a really positive story there. It's also a 2% improvement over the last 2 years from 2021. So really, really encouraging when you look at our demographics and industry, but we know we have more to do. In terms of some of the actions that we're taking across ESB specifically towards advancing gender equality, and Angus touched on it as well there, we have a broad strategy in terms of diversity, equity and inclusion, but just for the purposes of today, I just wanted to touch on specifically what we're doing to advance gender equality. So I mentioned there we have our gender target to reach 30% of our workforce being women by the end of next year. And we're currently working on that with the executives, with our leadership teams, to understand what are the best ways to do that, and listening to our women that we already have in the business to understand the key challenges and pinch points, and understanding what supports we need to put in place to address those. We're encouraging more women into STEM and craft roles specifically, and that is a challenge, but it's not impossible. And I've said this many times internally, you hear about the pipeline, you hear about all these challenges. That's something we can't ignore, but equally, I don't want to hear it used as an excuse. It's something we can absolutely still push forward on. We just need the drive to do it, which we absolutely have. Visible role models then. So we're encouraging women across all levels of the company to really showcase what makes ESB a great place to work, what makes their careers so rewarding, both internally and externally. Strengthening the STEM talent pipeline. So I mentioned there, we have a number of external partners that we work with. So we have our partnership with CWIT. We run our STEM teacher internship program, our STEM transition year program, which is actually ongoing at the moment. ESB Science Blast, which I'm sure you've all heard of. And then we have targeted visits to engineering and craft schools. So we're really trying to get out there at the school level, at the third level, at every level, to really enhance and promote ESB as a great place to work for STEM and for women in particular. Touching on a few of the supports that we have there for parents and carers. So we have our Managing Successful Parenting Transitions program. So this is a program that we've intentionally developed through research to provide parents of all genders with tools and skills that they need at each stage of their parenting journey. We're very intentional around the way we even advertise this internally. We, say all genders rather than both genders. And we're very clear on the fact that people have very different journeys towards parenthood. So this program is really there to ensure that we're supporting each of our employees, no matter what that journey is. And we also know that research shows that becoming a parent is a key pinch point in anyone's career, but particularly for women. And that is why we've created the program in this way, to really attempt to level the playing field, both at work, but at home as well. So that's something we're quite proud of. Family-friendly policies then. So this work is ongoing. We've a lot of work ongoing in this space, but so far we've actually reviewed our key people policies and family leave policies and embedded gender inclusive language, again, to ensure that we are being inclusive of all families. We have demographic data then, so additional demographic data. So last year we asked for the first time in our employee engagement survey for employees to voluntarily disclose whether they had parenting and or caring responsibilities. And that's the first time we've asked at ESB, and more than half of respondents self-identified that they did. So it's really important that we understand that we understand what our workforce composition looks like, so that we can then ensure as an employer that we have the right supports, policies, etc. in place. Our Pathways to Success program then, so this is a program that was developed internally by women for women, and we've piloted it last year to a group of about 30 women. That'll be wrapping up soon. The feedback so far has been brilliant. And look, I'll say this because it's come up a lot internally. You can do these programs, we can put in these interventions, but ultimately what we really need to remember at the core of all of this is systemic. This isn't just individual. So while we can offer these programs and there are people who are asking for these, who love these, and they're important, we equally recognize that that alone is not going to get us there. We need to look at our systems, our policies, our procedures, everything critically from an equity and inclusion perspective. So that's piloting at the moment, and we'll be launching that later this year. Finally then, so enhancing leadership capability. As I mentioned already, we have great buy-in right from the top at ESB, which is amazing. I've worked in other companies where it hasn't been as easy to get that. So it was a bit of a surprise and a treat to come in and see that we absolutely have that right at the top, which is great. But in terms of enhancing our leadership capability, so that's something that we're focused on at the moment at our executive level and also our senior manager population. So our executive committee actually completed a half day of in-person training 3 weeks ago now, which was really, really good. It's great to get them just in a room, off-site, to talk all things diversity, equity and inclusion. And the feedback from that was really, really great. And you could feel the commitment in the room. And we'll be launching similar training then to our senior managers later this year. Lastly, I did mention them already, but I'll just give a further shout out, is our employee resource groups. So we started with our LGBT plus employee resource group in 2016. They've gone from strength to strength, many successes. They've got a great program across the group. Last year, we introduced 3 additional employee resource groups. So I mentioned gender. We also introduced our accessibility ERG and then our cultural diversity and ethnicity ERG. And look, I said at the start, it is so important. ERGs are the lifeblood of DEI at any company. You need to hear from your people, to listen to them. Some of the best ideas I've ever seen come to fruition from a DEI program have been through employee resource groups. So look internally first, and you'll be surprised at the amount of knowledge and ideas that are already at your fingertips. So I will stop there, and I'm not sure who I'm handing to next, so I'll hand back to you, Ashley.
That's perfect. Thanks so much for that, Zoe. It was great to hear some really practical policies that you've put in place and that are, that you're making progress. A lot to be gained from that. I'd say from all on the call today. So our final speaker for this morning is Emmanuel Adeleke. Manny is a partner at Deloitte Ireland. He's a partner in consulting, leading the delivery of AI and data services across Ireland. And in his role, he is responsible for leading, scaling, and delivering Deloitte's offering and services to drive impact for clients across all sectors and industries. Manny is passionate about diversity, inclusion, and equity, having sponsored and led a number of initiatives, both in the workplace and wider society. So over to you, Manny.
Thanks, Ashley. I'm just going to also share my screen here now, so hopefully everyone can see that when I get into presentation mode. Is that working? Yeah, that's perfect. So, look, thanks for having me again this morning. I'm really excited to be a part of the panel, and I guess probably a couple of things that I wanted to maybe even start with before going into the presentation, and why topics like this are very close to myself as somebody who, you know, despite the funny Cork accent, I wasn't born in Cork. My family would have emigrated to Cork probably about 25 years ago, and looking back at my own journey, actually, when I came into Deloitte as a partner it was the 1st of June 2022, and that was a big milestone for a couple of reasons. You know, some of the topics we're focusing on today around diversity and inclusion. That day that I joined Deloitte as a partner, I became the first Black partner in any professional services organization in Ireland. So as somebody who's basically emigrated into the country to kind of get into that position, while it was a little bit of a surprise, it was something that I knew that, you know, I have a platform now, and what can I do with that platform? And I guess, you know, being involved in a number of initiatives such as this one, as a father of 2 daughters as well, this is something that's quite close to my heart. You know, I would have read a statistic around International Women's Day last year, actually, that we're over 130 years away from gender parity, which, you know, is shocking, but also something that I think we can definitely do something about as a group of leaders in different business platforms and domains. Like, you know, reading those kind of statistics is something that I think about, that, you know, I don't want to be part of a I suppose, a dynamic where my own daughters in their lifetime might not see gender parity. So those kind of statistics are things that I think are quite stark, but I also think we all have a platform and we all have a means to really change the narrative around that as well. So I just wanted to, you know, maybe share a little bit of that, those personal passion of mine around this topic as well. So in terms of ourselves as an organization, you know, diversity, equity, inclusion is at the heart of everything we do, from the very top down, from our CEO right through to every single member in an organization that has over 1,000 employees here in Ireland and over 450,000 globally. I think, you know, this is something that's at the heart of who we are, and our vision is very much around every single employee in the firm having a strong sense of belonging, you know, to be able to bring their true authentic self to work, and be treated with the level of respect and inclusion in terms of their day-to-day operations in the workplace. We have a very open policy around people providing feedback across all levels, right through to leadership, and being able to speak up if, for whatever reason, you know, there is ever any situation, or even if it's just a case of not necessarily about reporting issues, it's more around even if there's ideas or suggestions as to how we can make certain improvements. We have a very open policy around that, and we do have a zero tolerance policy on discrimination, which we're all very strong on. And again, the whole idea around creating equal opportunities and being able to develop and more importantly progress people to do their best work. And people can only do that if you feel like you can be your true authentic self, and you don't have to be a completely different version of who you are in the workplace. So having that inclusive culture is something that we're all very passionate about in Deloitte as well. It's, you know, then when we think about our strategies and, you know, some of the key areas that focus on, and we'll get into some specifics around this, is again back to the point that I made earlier around providing some equal opportunities to everybody, being able to develop our people in an environment where they can succeed and thrive in the workplace, but then actually, you know, driving and actually evolving our culture and behavior. And I think for most organizations, we've probably seen impact of COVID in the workplace, and in some cases negative, in other cases quite positive. I think, you know, some of the interesting statistics that you would have seen around COVID would have talked about the impact of women in the workplace actually, and that really kind of brought that to light a little bit more, where people had a lot more caring duties and not being able to be in a working environment. And some of those statistics and impact on attrition of women in the workplace around COVID would have been something that we would have been very conscious of, and we would have made proactive steps to I suppose work around some of those challenges as well. And then driving and evolving our culture and behaviors as well. And how do we leverage our own brand, as we talk about, you know, as a big global firm, that does carry a lot of weight, and people across all different levels of organizations outside the organization would look at organizations like Deloitte to be a leading voice in a number of these areas as well. And, we have a number of groups and initiatives within Deloitte. I personally sponsor our multicultural network, and we have other D&I groups, and across all different domains as well across the firm. And then very important for us is it's not just about talking about these things and these initiatives. We want to actually put ourselves at the forefront of this. So how do we measure and actually report and be transparent on this as well? So we're very, very open and transparent when it comes to things around our gender pay gap and actually other I suppose other statistics and areas that we would typically use to measure not just our impact in terms of society, but actually how do we hold ourselves accountable as an organization and as a leadership group. And where we do feel like we're not performing as well as we can be, how do we have that open and honest dialogue to really, make the right changes as well. So in terms of some of the key, I would say, initiatives that we have in the space, and look, I'm not going to go into too much detail on each one, and we can go into some of it in some of the Q&A towards the end. We have our DEI scorecard, which is basically, this is not just from an Irish context, it's a global scorecard that we all sign up to. And it's very much showing the key metrics around our hiring, promotion, attrition, headcount, utilization and leadership. And in terms of what does that look like from a gender perspective as well. And that's something that we all sign up to at a global level, and that trickles into us here in Ireland and other geographies across the globe as well. We very much have a mandate, and this is a mandatory requirement as well in terms of inclusive leadership workshops to actually develop awareness and actually capability across our leadership group as well, from all of our partners to directors and senior management group, to make sure that people are very, very aware of what does an inclusive workplace look like. How do you continue to promote an inclusive culture in the workplace as well? Then we have the panel promise and nominations that we would have initiated over the last couple of years as well, which is a new initiative, again, being rolled out globally from Deloitte, that every panel discussion or decisions that we do have does include at a very minimum 40% of either gender. And if we are speaking on any panel, that we very quickly make sure that there's a balance in that. And it's not just about internal discussions, that we would often have situations where we have to go out to our clients and have presentations around maybe trying to deliver certain projects and deliver work. And when we do go out, that is something that's at the forefront of what we do as well. Just because, if I take my own role, I work in the tech space, but just because we work in a tech space doesn't mean you have to always end up in a room where, it's mostly men. That we challenge ourselves, that we are going to our clients and how we show up in our clients and how we show up as Deloitte, that we're very, very cognizant of making sure that we do bring that gender parity and that gender balance and that diversity of thought and opinions as well to the day-to-day work that we do. We have a female leadership series, which is an internal and external written series as well. And some people may have seen this online, where we profile a number of our female leaders and specifically get them to very openly share, some of the key turning points, and maybe around 5 key turning points in their careers, and how they've evolved and how they've dealt with it, and maybe any advice and guidance that they would have for other aspiring leaders coming up through different parts of our business as well. So it's not necessarily just people in one particular domain. We have our Deloitte Works policy, which is something that would have came through as part of our hybrid working construct. So we all know that just because a more traditional working sense may be previously around a 9-to-5 kind of a role, we have a much more, I would say, inclusive approach to that. And actually, we've seen significant differences in terms of our attrition rates is actually now lower for female employees than male employees, as a result of our much more flexible working policies in the sense of, people obviously have different duties. I take myself, even personally, there are days where, I'm doing the school run or a collection or bringing my daughters to activities and things like that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to feel the need that, I have to get permission to do all of these things. I make my work around my schedule and my own personal commitments to my own family as well. So I think, we show that, and it's something we do as a group within Deloitte, that we show it as a leadership group. So we make sure that all of our teams are part of that as well. The gender pay gap report is something that we issue as well, and we're not where we want to be on that. We're very transparent on those, and we're very much we're on an upward trajectory on that front as well, and definitely making the right initiatives and putting those initiatives in place. And we are seeing the benefits of those initiatives in terms of narrowing and closing that gap as well. And then sponsorship, everyone talks about leadership and mentors, but I actually think sponsorship is something that's really important in terms of trying to create the next layer of female leaders in the business. And this is very much around actively and proactively making sure that we are identifying the right talent, we're identifying the right people in the organization, and actively promoting and putting people in a position where there are opportunities to have the equal, I suppose, platform to progress as well as others in the organization. And I think we now have a mandate as well as a partner group within Deloitte that each one of us are actively sponsoring at least one new female director or senior manager, with a view to supporting them and their progression through our business to partner level as well. And that's a commitment that we all make as a group within Deloitte as well. So these are just some examples of some of the initiatives that we've been proactively working through as a leadership team over the last couple of years as well. One of the points that I mentioned is around our transparency and being able to show the progress we're making when it comes to gender pay gap reporting. As you can see in the bottom of the charts there, I'm a data and analytics person, so I do like stats and facts and figures, and trying to use this to really make ourselves more accountable and be very transparent with our people on the journey that we're going on. And obviously across different levels, what we tend to find previously, and we're now starting to see a shift in the other direction, where we tend to find a lot of cases, and I've seen it with clients and other organizations as well, as probably at the more junior level in certain areas that the balance is there, but as people progress through those more, I suppose, more senior positions and at different stages in terms of their lives and careers, we start to see that tail off in terms of male and female balance. And we're trying to basically put the right measures in place from day one to make sure that you don't start with a close to 50-50 base, and then you're getting to senior management and director and partner level, and where do we start to see some of those key pinch points and put some real interventions in place to ensure that we see the same level of transition, I suppose, through our business over people's career as well. And then in terms of our gender pay gap, one of the things that we're very proactive on is making sure that that gap continues to close to zero. Essentially, as we know where we started from, even looking back to 6 years ago, as you can see the figures there on the right hand side, and how that number is down to low single digit. It's still not as low as we would want it to be, but again, this is the point around some of those initiatives that I would have showed in the previous slide, in terms of these initiatives are really now having the right impact, and we're seeing that in terms of some of these numbers as well, very much going in the right direction. It's not where we want it to be, but we're pretty confident that we're on the right path and on the right journey as well. And then in terms of some of the other key and enhanced commitments that we have, and this is just to go into a bit more detail on that. Obviously, in an environment like ours, where we know we don't have the right balance that we would like, we have the aspiration to get to a 50% female partner target, and not necessarily where you're just because we're in a professional service environment where that's not necessarily always the norm or the trend. We want to make sure that we get to that, we get to that balance. The return to work program is one that's quite interesting as well. And what we tend to find is the majority of career returners actually are women. And what we try to do is we're aiming to take a lot more returners to the workplace, and we tend to see a lot of trends. I'm sure a number of others on this, and maybe different organizations will see the same trend as well. That people tend to I've talked about that move, or maybe people get to a certain stage in life, whether they have caring duties, parenting duties, or anything like that, where they feel the need to drop off, maybe not necessarily having the confidence to enter the workplace. And we have a number of support programs and processes in place to reintegrate more returners to the workplace. And again, statistics in society shows that most of those returners are mainly female. But again, in an ideal world, you want to stop the environment that creates the pressures for people to have to maybe step away from the workplace, but at least we know we have a support mechanism to allow the transition back into the workplace as well. And then we have the global panel promise, which I've talked about. We're very focused in terms of female hiring as well. So I have a number, for instance, in my own team, I have a number of agencies that we work with in terms of hiring and recruitment in specific targeted roles. One of the mandates that I'm very clear with any recruiter that we work on is, just because I lead an AI and data team doesn't mean I want to see 10 profiles where 9 of them are male. I'm pretty confident that yes, we might not necessarily have the same pool at certain levels, but if we're not actively engaging people to try and source that talent and be more balanced in terms of how we're sourcing those talent, then we're definitely doing something wrong, because it's all well and good that you want to plug a gap, but you also want to show that leadership level that you see. I suppose representation does matter for a lot of people, so you have to see it to be it as well. And just even give a very, not to bore people with what AI is doing and not doing. I don't think I could go into any discussions and not mention AI and the role of AI, but I think, as somebody who's a leader in the space, the whole idea of building trust and ethical consideration to how AI is applied is something that's at the heart of what we do with our clients as well. And just even give a very day-to-day example, like we would have seen incidents, not that very recently actually, where people would have used AI in an HR context for trying to identify candidates and go through CVs. And while some of those models are built and they're built with the right intentions, the reality just actually biases in some of the data set that's informing that, and some of those biases are actually unknown in certain cases. So, for instance, I think there was a scenario where the word ambitious, for whatever reason, was a lot more prominent in male CVs than female CVs. And for models that were developed to select CVs, that model was trained the right way, but some of those kind of words would have been a deciding factor. So then the model returned a lot more male profiles than female profiles. And again, for somebody who's involved in creating and building some of these technologies, we need to, as we go to market with our clients, we're advising that there's trust, there's ethical considerations in whatever is being used, because ultimately everyone is all crazy about ChatGPT and what AI can do and the power of AI. It's fantastic, but if you even take the whole logic around ChatGPT, it's all about using existing data to create new data. But in a lot of cases, a lot of existing data is human generated data, and humans are inherently biased. So it's just making sure that we remove some of those biases even in terms of our day-to-day, because as we evolve and as we even introduce more and more technology into how we work, the more we do as a society to remove some of those biases and have that ethical kind of consideration and mindset, the more we can evolve as a group of people as well. So just to maybe highlight that point, so in terms of how we discuss some of these solutions with our clients. So just because we're talking about tech doesn't mean we can't bring ethics and different considerations into the discussions as well. And then we've talked about gender balanced development opportunity as well. So one of the things we try to do is, when we are looking at succession planning across different levels in our business and all different divisions in our business, one of the things we make sure that we're doing is ensuring that we provide greater transparency around the promotion process, that there's the right balance and very open in terms of how we communicate around that. And then one of the things that I think has been quite important as well is all of our partners are mandated to complete a workshop around gender balance, because one of the things we want to make sure again that we continue to do is build in that greater awareness at leadership level in terms of what our real value should be, and how does that actually work through our sponsorship approaches as well, and how we make certain decisions as a business. And then the other couple of hiring, not even just not the hiring, but actually in terms of our financial advisory women's network, actually this is a part of our business, for instance, that we know as a sector and as an industry, it's something that's I would say has been very much more male dominated sector for a number of years, and we're proactively making that approach where we recently launched our financial advisory women's network, because what we want to try and do is it allows that network to support and more importantly then promote more female work in that space as well. And then we do a number of other things outside of just the day-to-day business. Like we would be one of the flagship sponsors for, I'm not sure if a lot of people have heard of iWish. One of the founders of iWish is one of our partners here in Cork, actually, Caroline O'Driscoll. So again, that's very much around promoting female inclusion within STEM subjects, because ultimately it's all well and good that we want to make those impact and address it at a certain point when people have got to a certain stage, but I think we all have a role to play in terms of how we start to look at that from a very early onset as people go through secondary and school before they even start to get into universities. I mean, I would have seen things in the past around the fact that a lot of female only schools in Ireland wouldn't have offered subjects like applied maths, for instance. And what are we saying to our young people as a society, for kind of thinking, well, for you as a female to do applied maths, you either have to do it after school, or you have to go to a mixed school or a male school to take some of those subjects. Why aren't those subjects, and interestingly and very ironically, a lot of those schools that don't offer applied maths do offer home economics. So again, as a society, what are we doing to ensure that we're promoting some of those types of behaviors to actually change, not just in the workplace, but actually culturally in society as well? So
sorry to interrupt you there, Manny. Just hoping to save a bit of time for the Q&A. You're really on a roll there.
That was it. That was it. I am done. And I just wanted to say thanks again, and yeah, definitely open to the Q&A.
That's great. Thanks so much for that. A lot of key takeaways, a lot of great initiatives that Deloitte's involved in, that you've been involved in. So let's get straight to it with the rest of our panelists here. There's a few questions in the chat box, which is great to see. So let's start off with the first one from Karen here. So what would you consider a first must step for businesses who are just starting their journey in cultivating a culture that values and supports gender equality and inclusion? I'd love to hear from Angus on this one, to hear his insights.
Great question. I would say, first of all, you need to articulate to the organization why it's important to focus on this. It's all the elements we talked about around the business benefits, higher levels of innovation, better results, better decision making, etc. So articulating that to the organization, so they understand, why are we putting an emphasis on this? Why are we making it a priority versus maybe other things they would consider to be normal priorities within a business? And then secondly, I think to get started and to drive the focus, you need to measure, where are you today? You need to set a target of where you want to get to. It could be 3 years or 5 years out, but then build an action plan and then report internally if that's what you want to do. I think more and more requirement will be to report externally, as things like gender pay gap, for example, develop in Ireland, and other initiatives and other EU legislation that's coming around diversity and inclusion. But report on that and track against the target. So if you have a target to increase your representation by 5% or 10%, what are you looking to achieve within 12 months, 24 months, and track against that and report on it? But I think the most important thing is to articulate to the organization, explain why you're making it a business priority and why you're focusing on it, and what are the benefits to everybody in the organization from doing that.
Yeah, it's all about gaining that buy-in, isn't it, from the top and across the organization. That's kind of what's been articulated from everyone here on the call today. We have another question here that I think was kind of addressed in Manny's later slides on the gender pay gap, so I might just skip on to the next one if that's okay. Okay, so this is an interesting question here on the rise in zero-sum beliefs and bias, and how companies can kind of overcome that challenge. And I think, Zoe, I think it's been touched on by Zoe, by Angus as well, the need to involve men in the conversation, by Manny as well. And I think the example that you shared, Zoe, on managing the parenting transition program is a really great example of that. So I think what we want to know is, how can we involve men in this conversation, make them a part of the debate, so that, it really is, and it is about inclusion at the end of the day. Zoe, if you want to maybe start off with that.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Ashley. And look, I think that's a great question. And for anyone who hasn't read Heather McGee's book on Zero Sum, What Racism Costs All of Us, please add it to your wish list, because it's a brilliant book and it really articulates that point really, really well. As difficult as it is to read, it's a very important read for all of us to understand. But look, I think absolutely we need to bring men into the conversation. We need to bring everyone into the conversation. If we are going to solve this problem, and we can't do that if we continue this kind of divisiveness amongst ourselves. This is a joint issue. We're all losing out from this. The economy's losing out, society's losing out, kids are losing out, we're all losing out. So ultimately we need to work together to solve this. If you look at any sort of change that's happened, whether that's a revolution or a huge change in society or norms, that always happens when people come together. Instead of looking at each other as different and separate, when we come together as a group of people with a shared defined purpose, that's when the magic really happens. That's when the pressure gets put on our leaders. That's when change can happen. But I think in terms of practical terms, internally, you know, in a company, bringing a man in, bringing a sponsor in. I think what Angus mentioned there in terms of gender balance of ERGs, that's something we would always strive for as well, making sure that you've got a good spread there. And also of ages, I've found, you know, we tend to kind of look at more senior people or people of a certain vintage, but actually looking at diversity there as well, you can get really great ideas. Ensuring that men are part of the conversation right from the get-go, understanding their role in it. And understanding that this isn't men versus women. This isn't in any way a divisive thing. This is actually something, it's a shared problem. Let's put it on the table and let's figure out how we're going to do that together as a group.
Great. Thanks, Zoe. We have 2 more questions in the chat, and I'd really like to get to them before we finish the call. So this first one here is really asking about, I guess, how do you retain women once you get them on a board, you know, with huge number of challenges, I guess, that women face, you know, over their lifetimes as their kind of lifestyles change. How do you retain them? And Angus, I'd love for you to comment on this.
Yeah, look, I mean, overall, whether it's around increasing the diversity in your organization from a gender point of view, or whether it's retaining that diversity and building on it over time, I think the key message I think all of us would give you here today is that there is no silver bullet. There is no one thing you should do. And I saw an earlier question in what should you do in the short, the medium, and the long term. For me, what it is about is the things we talked about: measure it, set some targets, and build a plan. You have to stick with it, though, over the medium to long term. And my biggest fear, and I see this in companies, is a challenge comes in your industry or economically or business-wise, and it drops down the agenda. In fact, it's actually at the time of your greatest challenges that you need that diversity, because probably what you're doing is the same thing over and over again, and you need diversity of thought, idea, and input to tackle this different issue, this different challenge. And fundamentally, what I would say always to companies, teams, and organizations, if you don't do this, your competitor will do it. And probably through that diversity of thought and innovation and skills and ideas, they'll actually turn the business on its head, the industry. They'll transform it, and you'll be left behind. And you see that in many companies that stick with a strategy and don't take that diversity of thought and input to adjust and transform. And technology is transforming industries at a rapid pace. So that need for that input and diversity of thought is huge. So that would be my key point here, is there is no single thing. It's about over the medium to long term, changing and evolving the culture, enhancing the diversity of the organization, and reaping the benefits from a business perspective and sticking with it.
That's it. That's a great takeaway there, to just keep on going really at the end of the day. But, you know, we constantly really have to change, don't we, to, you know, keep up with the changing society as well. So then I think we have time for one final question. Question here from Catherine Sheridan on intersectionality. Any thoughts on that, I guess, in how businesses can, you know, ensure that they're taking intersectionality into account when they're forming their DEI programs? Manny, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, completely. And I think probably at the heart of it all, I would say maybe just even a very simple statement. There's something around, it's completely okay to acknowledge our differences, but I think the more important thing is actually accepting each of those differences, right? So for me, as a starting point, when we do think about whether that's our teams or people or leadership, it's understanding the different things that makes us diverse, whether that's gender, whether that's race, whether that's sexual orientation, or whatever it is. That needs to be at the heart of what we do, because when we talk about DE&I, it's not necessarily just about one component of all of those differences, I suppose, within our different groups as well. So for me, it is, you know, thinking about all of those different components as we form different construct, I suppose, within our teams, and how we go to market together as a business and how we work together as a team. So that's something that's at the heart of everything we do within Deloitte. So, you know, like I said, okay to acknowledge that we're all different for a lot of different reasons, but actually accepting it is a lot more important, is my sense.
And some of those kind of ERG, those groups that you had spoken about, Zoe, probably is a really great way to understand, you know, what those differences are, who your people are at the end of the day, and really hearing from them what they need. Great. Okay, well, it is 12 o'clock on the dot, so we are going to wrap up this really great discussion. I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone on the call enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much to the three of you, our speakers today, Angus, Zoe, and Manny, for sharing your expertise and insights and joining in on this really important discussion. Really appreciate it. Thanks to our sponsors, Cork Chamber Skillnet and ASB Generation and Trading, for your continued support. Thanks to our viewers for joining in today's discussion and for continuing to showing up after all these years to these webinars and pushing forward in your own organizations. And of course, thanks to Vicky on our events team for helping me running this event. Make sure to check out corkchamber.ie for info on upcoming events and webinars. And I hope you all have a great long weekend and happy St. Patrick's Day. Bye.